Okay, so Lise, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Lise De Wit. I am a neuropsychology intern at Emory University at the Department of Neurology currently, and also at rehab. I am doing my minor rotation with Dr. Goldstein, Dr. Salmon, and Dr. Vickers as part of the cognitive team at the Cognitive Empowerment Program. I did my previous training at the University of Florida, and I am really interested in cognitive impairment and behavioral interventions that can help mediate cognitive impairment. And clinically, I'm interested in several other factors as well, including sleep and interventions for sleep. And that's what I will be talking to you about today. So before any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. I will address those together with Dr. Goldstein, who's on the call today as well. So let me share my screen and let's get started. All right. So I hope everyone can see this okay. Okay, great. So my talk is called Difficulty Sleeping. It's linked with cognition and behavioral interventions to improve sleep. So I'd like to start off with a little bit of background. All right, so sleep problems become more common as we age. Depending on the research study, between 12 and 48% of individuals aged 65 or higher have trouble sleeping. So that's a lot of individuals. And we know that aging is associated with several changes in sleep. So that can include for it to take longer to fall asleep, spending more time awake at night, more frequent awakening, so waking up more often. We also know that aging tends to be associated with more naps, and there are also several medical conditions associated with aging that can impact sleep. So one example is benign prostatic hyperplasia in men, which is related to having to urinate more frequently at night. And then also menopause in women can be associated with night sweats, hot flashes, and also just a higher risk of insomnia in general. So poor sleep, like probably most of you all know, can have negative effects on us, both physically and mentally. Poor sleep is a risk factor for several conditions like heart disease, heart failure, high blood pressure, stroke, diabetes, and weight gain. The risk that you'd get in a car accident is also higher when you have poor sleep, just because when you're more sleepy, it's just more likely that you'll have an accident. But there are also several mental conditions that are associated with poor sleep. So for example, if you feel depressed, depression is associated with poor sleep, but then also you're more likely to get depressed if you're sleeping poorly. So that's kind of like a vicious cycle that can be lead to even poorer sleep and even poorer mood. What we also know is that sleep can impact several cognitive functions, including attention, alertness, concentration, reasoning, and problem solving. Now, most of you may have noticed that after a poor night of sleep, you tend to not feel quite as sharp the next morning. So often we experience that we have more trouble paying attention to conversations, more trouble focusing whenever we've had a poor night of sleep. Now, research suggests that sleep helps learning and memory in two different ways. The first way is that when we are sleep deprived, like I said, we tend to have more trouble focusing, and therefore it is less likely that the information really gets in. we tend to have more trouble remembering whatever we have trouble focusing on. But there's also another way in which sleep tends to impact our memory. So sleep itself has a role in the consolidation of memory. So memory consolidation is the strengthening of new memories that we learn during the day. So that consolidation process helps transfer the information that you learn during the day to a more permanent place, kind of like your long-term memory. So research suggests that memory consolidation takes place during sleep through the strengthening of neural connections that form our memory. And there's no consensus on how exactly that happens, but many researchers think that there are specific characteristics of brain waves during different stages of sleep that are associated with the formation of particular types of memory. And then vice versa, our sleep can also be impacted by brain changes. So let me tell you a little bit more about that. What we know is that sleep issues occur in about 14 to 59% of individuals with mild cognitive impairment. Sleep issues are common in several kinds of neurodegenerative conditions, and these include Parkinson's disease and dementia with Lewy bodies. But there's also some evidence that people that don't sleep well can have kind of a buildup of proteins that are associated with the specific plaques and tangles that are seen in Alzheimer's disease. Now, this type of research is still relatively new, and like a lot of research related to Alzheimer's disease, there's still a lot that we don't know about those specific mechanisms, but there is some evidence to suggest that there are changes in sleep very, very early on in Alzheimer's disease. Now, the good news related to all of this is that there are several behavioral interventions that we can do at home that can help improve sleep. And most people, regardless of the cause of the sleep disturbances, can benefit from those behavioral interventions. And so we'll go through several of those today. So how do we improve sleep? Well, first I want to mention that we all sleep poorly sometimes, and that is completely normal. So if you have trouble getting a good night of sleep once in a while, that is nothing to be concerned about. It happens to everyone. But if you sleep poorly for a while and your sleepiness during the day is starting to impact your daily functioning, it might be worth it to talk to your doctor about that, because they might have ideas for either medications or specific therapies that you might be able to try. Now, there are different pharmacological approaches that can help with sleep. They kind of fall into two different categories. We've got the prescription medications. These include hypnotics like Ambien, and there are also different over-the-counter meds that people tend to use for sleep, including Benadryl or other antihistamines and melatonin. Now, we know that medications can be helpful short-term, but they are typically not intended for long-term use. There are also several side effects that can happen with sleep medications, including feeling sedated or a little groggy the day after you take them. Another side effect is difficulty with memory. So we know that the chronic use, for example, of antihistamines like Benadryl can impact the cholinergic system, and that system is really important for memory. So long-term use of medications like that can be associated with some trouble with memory. Other side effects include the increased risk of falls, and it is also possible that some of these medications, whether or not they're over the counter, can start to interact with each other. So whenever you see your doctor, it's really important that you mention all the medications that you're taking, even if it's over the counter medications. The other types of intervention that we can do that don't involve medications tend to be put under the umbrella of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia includes different components. What we know is that it is empirically supported. So that means that research has shown that it works overall, it tends to work well for people. And it's been found by research that it's just as effective as medications. And it can be even more effective than medications in the long term. Now, we know that cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia improves sleep by changing behaviors and habits, and also how you think about sleep. It's really focused on reestablishing the connection between the bed and your ability to fall asleep. So often for individuals that have trouble sleeping chronically, the bed becomes basically their enemy. It's a place where they feel really frustrated because they feel like they should be asleep and they're just not asleep. We also know that when people are stressed or they tend to worry a lot, this is often what they tend to do when they're unable to fall asleep. And so we can start to see the bed as a place of frustration rather than as a place of sleep and a place of peace. And so cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia really focuses on reestablishing that specific connection. Now, I'm going to talk about different elements of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. You can try any of these elements at home if you have some trouble sleeping. Most of what I'm going to be talking about is safe to try at home. I will say, if it doesn't help you, it's great to see your doctor or even a sleep coach to try the whole therapy together with someone, because there's a lot of problem solving that you could do together with a sleep coach that might be a little bit harder to try yourself. But I will tell you a little bit more about some of these different components. So the first component that I'd like to discuss with you is sleep hygiene. So sleep hygiene has nothing to do with actual hygiene. It has nothing to do with hand washing or showering. It is related to avoiding specific behaviors that can, or either different behaviors or different products that can impact sleep. So one of the main products that we tell people that have trouble sleeping to avoid is caffeine. We know that caffeine is a stimulant that can lead to increased arousal, and therefore it can also impact our sleep. So some people are very sensitive to the effects of caffeine. Those people probably know that they can't have caffeine very late in the day, but even for people who don't feel that connection that strongly, but that do have trouble falling asleep at night, it can be worth it to start avoiding caffeine after noon to see if that helps. Most of you probably know this, but caffeine is not just a product. Caffeine is not just in coffee. There are many different products that include caffeine. Some of those are tea, also chocolate, especially dark chocolate has a good amount of caffeine in it. So all of those different products can be worth avoiding if you have trouble sleeping at night. Nicotine is another product that can impact sleep. Nicotine, like caffeine, is a stimulant that can make falling and staying asleep more difficult. So if you do use nicotine products and you have trouble sleeping, it might be worth trying not having any nicotine products about 2 hours before bedtime. And exercise is a little more tricky. We know that overall exercise actually improves our sleep. So those who tend to exercise regularly tend to actually have better sleep, but it can be worth it to avoid exercise within 2 hours of bedtime because exercising too close to bedtime can put our body in a state of arousal that can make it more difficult to fall asleep and more difficult for our bodies to relax at night. With regards to alcohol, I know that a lot of people tend to think that alcohol improves their sleep. And for some people, it's true that alcohol, having one drink of alcohol, actually makes them fall asleep faster. Now, what research does show is that alcohol does impact our quality of our sleep, and it's also associated with more frequent nighttime awakenings. And then for some people, it actually doesn't help them fall asleep faster at all. It actually makes it more difficult to fall asleep. So in line with the sleep hygiene guidelines, one could try to avoid alcohol within 2 hours of bedtime. Another sleep hygiene guideline is avoiding heavy meals within 2 hours of bedtime. Heavy meals can put a strain in our digestive system. While you're trying to fall asleep, it can cause physical discomfort and metabolic changes, and all of those mechanisms can interfere with sleep. And the last guideline that I want to discuss with you here is screen time. We know that a lot of screens that we tend to use, so laptops, TVs, even phones, have blue light, and that blue light can interfere with body processes that can promote sleep. So we all have a biological clock, and blue light can signal to our brains that it is still daytime and not time to go to bed yet. And it can also interfere with this hormone called melatonin, and melatonin aids to our bodies that it's time to go to sleep. So avoiding blue lights and screen time in general before bedtime can improve our sleep as well. Okay. The second part of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia that I want to discuss with you today is stimulus control. And stimulus control is really focused on that association between the bed or bedroom, and sleep, that association that I talked about earlier. So it's about re-establishing sleep promoting associations with the bedroom and the bed. And I explained to you before that that is because the bed is often gets associated as kind of like a frustration place. So in order to avoid that, we there are several guidelines that you could try out. Some of these take a little bit of effort and can be a little challenging at first, but we do know that it tends to help. So the first guideline is not to use the bed or the bedroom for anything other than sleep or sex. So use the bed only for those specific things that it's really meant for, and don't use your bed for other activities like reading, like watching TV, being on your phone, and that can already help improve that association between the bed and actually going to sleep. The second guideline is that whenever it's taking you some time to fall asleep, so we tend to say more than 15 or 20 minutes, it can be helpful to get up and leave the bed and go do something else in a different room. It can be an activity that is soothing or calming, but avoid staying in bed when you're unable to fall asleep. And then also go back only when you feel sleepy again. And again, this is to break that association between being awake in the bed. And similarly, whenever you wake up at night and it takes you a lot of time to fall back asleep, so you've been awake about 15 or 20 minutes in the middle of the night, do the same thing. So get up, go to a different room, engage in a relaxing activity, or just do something else, but don't stay in bed to avoid that awake time that you get in bed. And then lastly, another guideline in line with stimulus control is to avoid naps. Now, naps meet some of our sleep need and make it less likely that we fall asleep at night quickly. By not napping, it is also more likely that we'll feel extra tired, and we're more likely to fall asleep that same night. So if you must nap for safety reasons, try not to nap too late in the day. So try not to nap maybe past 3 p.m. or try to keep your naps really short. But what we know is that napping kind of throws off our body rhythm and can have a negative impact on our quality of sleep at night. Now, I told you all about that it can be helpful to get up at night when you have trouble falling asleep. And so a lot of people ask us, what do you do when you get up at night? Like, where do I go? What do I do? So there are several activities that you could try. You could, well, it's best if you go to a room where you still do feel relaxed. So maybe the living room, maybe the couch. It's okay for you to be as comfortable as possible. So some activities that we recommend are reading a book, folding laundry, grooming your pet, circling all of the O's in a newspaper, listening to music, organizing your photos or other items, doing some stretching, nothing that gets your heart rate up, writing in a journal. Basically, the more boring, the better, because we're not trying to have a good time. We're not trying to have a good time. We're just trying to get sleepy, right? And it's also important, again, to avoid blue lights because we're trying to signal to our bodies that it's time to sleep. And so we don't want to signal that it's daytime to our bodies. So again, the more boring, the better. Don't get too active, don't get too involved. And that's also why I said read a boring book. Because if you get too engaged in a book, if you really enjoy knitting, or if you really get engaged in some of these activities, that won't help us to get more sleepy. So try and find something that will keep you busy and will get you relaxed, but it doesn't get you too involved or too active. There are some other strategies that we can use whenever we have trouble falling asleep. Some of these are kind of put under the umbrella of relaxation techniques. And so that can include mindfulness. So for example, breathing techniques or meditation. It can also include things like guided imagery. So I put this beautiful picture of a path in the forest here. So with guided imagery, what you would do is you would kind of make this mental image of what it's like to be in a forest, and you focus on all the different senses. So you imagine all the things that you would see, including the green trees, maybe a bird. You think of what you could smell, including maybe the dirt, maybe rain. You think of how it would feel to be there. So maybe you'd feel a breeze. And so those kinds of activities can really help our body relax and can help us let go of specific worries that we might have that can keep us up at night. Another technique that I listed here is progressive muscle relaxation. And that is a technique as part of which you tense specific muscles. So you focus on one muscle at a time. So for example, you really tense your arm muscle and you focus on what that feels like. And then you let go of that and you focus on what that feels like. So that's another technique to kind of focus on that can help direct your attention to the current moment, to your current body sensations, and it can reduce our worries at night and our stress. So if some of these specific relaxation strategies are unfamiliar to you and you don't know how to get started with them, there are a lot of different YouTube videos that you could find. There are also specific apps. So I listed a few of them here. One of them is called Calm, Sleep, Pillow, Breathe to Relax, Insight Timer, and Headspace. Now, many of these are free. Some of them have components that you could buy, but they tend to have also several free videos or audio pieces that you can listen to that really can help guide you to learn more about some of these relaxation techniques. And so a little bit more about how you would incorporate some of these techniques. What we tend to recommend is that whenever you have trouble sleeping, or maybe whenever you go to bed, you try and engage in some of these techniques. So for example, you start to focus on your breath and what it feels like to breathe in and breathe out instead of on your worries. That can sometimes help us fall asleep. Now, whenever that would be still difficult. So whenever you're still not able to fall asleep, what can help is still repeating those techniques that I mentioned earlier. So still getting up after 20 minutes and doing something else. So all of these techniques can go together, and they tend to work best when you do use them all together. So sometimes there are specific things that get in our way of using these techniques correctly. It can be a little bit more difficult than what it sounds like to do it. So if you have given all of this a try and it still doesn't work for you, it might be worth it to talk to your doctor and maybe even a sleep coach. So work with a specific therapist that is trained in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, to see where they can help you. So I have a few takeaways here. So there are different behavioral strategies that you can try if you have trouble sleeping at night, like the ones I listed before. I think it's really important to mention here that you should not start making changes in your medications without consulting your doctors. And if you are concerned about your sleep, if your sleep problems persist, please go see your doctors. I listed the specific information of the Emory Sleep Center here. What they do there is they do both assessments to assess for specific sleep disorders there, but they also have therapists that provide cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. I also put my email address down here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I'm happy to take any questions now as well.
Thanks, Lise. That was great. So we do have a few questions. The first question that I saw come in earlier was they were mentioning that when they were younger, they remember their father having sleep troubles throughout the night, and now they're waking up a few times in the night. They're wondering if there's any hereditary aspects to sleep problems.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I know is that there are several conditions that are associated with insomnia that are to some extent hereditary. So for example, anxiety tends to be associated with insomnia, and that has a genetic link, not fully, but there is a genetic link. So that could play a role. I'm not sure what you think, Dr. Goldstein. Do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, Lise, that's right. What you said too about, conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, those are definitely associated with sleep problems and can have a hereditary link with sleep. The other thing I learned while researching this question, luckily I was able to, it turns out that there's some evidence for insomnia being hereditary. So there are specific genes that have been implicated in people who have insomnia. So that's another possible link with genetics. And finally, I read about sleep apnea. About 40% of people who have sleep apnea also have a gene for sleep apnea. So there is some evidence, but the bottom line, like Lise had said, is there are techniques, even if something's genetic, it's still treatable. And you could still apply many of the behavioral techniques that Lise presented today and try to treat some of these conditions that you're experiencing. But that's a great question.
Yeah, what a
Mhm.
good question.
Yeah.
So we also had another question. So this person mentioned that they frequently fall asleep in the middle of the day, and they could be doing like a task like reading or watching TV or on the computer. Do you have any recommendations for someone who feels themselves falling asleep frequently in the middle of the day? Like, how do you reduce the amount of napping that you can do?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So what comes to mind for me is techniques that are kind of like the opposite of some of the techniques that I mentioned related to insomnia. So one thing that you could try is getting a lot of daylight. And that sounds very simple, but making sure that you signal to your body that it is in fact day and it's not night. So making sure you spend time in front of a window or even outside. There are also those specific light machines. I'm not sure what they're called, but that you can order on Amazon, and that actually sends blue lights to your eyes, and it can help keep us awake during the day. You may also want to consider getting active, so physically active, which I told you to avoid right before sleep, before going to bed. But if you're trying to stay awake, it can be helpful to get up at least every hour, walk around, and again, to signal to your body that it is still time to be awake.
I just want to highlight just on that last point that you made on walking around, especially only because they specifically mention activities such as reading, watching TV, and on their computer. So I feel like if those are the activities that I feel like you find yourself falling asleep, maybe getting, up and active in between, to might help during those activities.
Absolutely. And some of those activities would be very possible in front of a window or even outside. So if you're reading a book, the weather has been wonderful in Atlanta. So reading the book outside might make it less likely that you fall asleep while doing that.
Yeah.
I was going to mention to you guys, there is a condition called excessive daytime sleepiness, what doctors will ask about. And I don't know that this is a particular problem this person's having. It's not unusual to want to take an afternoon nap at times, but if you're finding that you are excessively tired during the day and you are sleeping, and people are commenting, hey, you always seem to be napping or sleeping, or your naps are 3 and 4 hours, not 30 minutes. It could be a sign of something else going on, like sleep apnea. Maybe you're not getting a really good night's sleep, and that's something to talk about with your doctor and see whether they recommend some sort of workup to make sure that's not the problem as well.
Absolutely. So if sleep problems persist, but also if daytime sleepiness persists, it's helpful to go see your doctor.
Yeah. We also had a question and a comment regarding things to eat or drink before bed, and someone mentioned that they find drinking an herbal tea before bed relaxing, and that can help them sleep. That was a comment, and then we also had a question about Tart cherry juice, as if you know anything about that as a sleep aid. Please, have you ever heard of that?
I haven't heard of that. That's not to say that it doesn't work. And with many of these different strategies that I talked about, it may not work for everyone, but it may work for some people. So if you have found something that works for you, that's great.
I've heard of Tart cherry juice being recommended by one of our sleep doctors, and also melatonin is something that people try as well as being another type of treatment somebody can do that's doesn't have to be prescribed. It's just something that you can get and try as another alternative.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We also had another question where they mentioned that they have a lot of flexibility in basically when they can sleep. So if you have a lot of, maybe it doesn't matter, like you can go to bed at different times and you can wake up at different times. How does someone find their optimal hours for sleep?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And we tend to work a lot with sleep, with bedtimes and wake times for people that have a lot of issues falling asleep. So one thing that I didn't really mention, but that's true for individuals with insomnia, is that it's helpful to stick to one specific bedtime and one specific wake time. But if you don't have issues sleeping, I think it's not as important that you stick to any of these strategies that we talked about. If your sleep is good, if you're able to fall asleep whenever you'd like to, I think it might not be as much of an issue if you do that.
Mm-hmm. Also, Lisa, I'm not sure if you or Dr. Goldstein would know this. Someone asked if the Emory Sleep Clinic, if they can go there on their own or if they need a referral from a primary care physician. Do you guys know?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So what I found this specific information on the website. I've worked with the University of Florida Sleep Center. I'm not quite as familiar with the Emory Sleep Center, but this is what I found on the website, and it did have that phone number there. So you could just give them a call and see what they say.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Someone also asked a question about how do you deal with when your mind is like constantly thinking like at night? I know that we usually refer to this as like ruminating. If someone's having that, do you have any recommendations on what to do?
Yeah, so this is really a great example of when those specific strategies that I mentioned, mainly the stimulus control one, so getting up out of your bed whenever you have trouble sleeping and doing something relaxing and soothing in a different room. And also those relaxation strategies. Both of those techniques work pretty well if it is your mind that keeps racing at night. So definitely would recommend that you give that a try. And what I haven't really mentioned earlier is that it tends to take some time before these kinds of strategies really pay off. So give it a few weeks at least to see if it works for you. Because, for example, that association between the bed and sleep doesn't get established in a day. It can take a few weeks before that really makes a difference.
Yeah, and one other comment that I also saw was someone mentioned that they were using a noise machine that's been helping block out noises like snoring or anything like that. Do you guys have any other opinions on noise machines? I know that you're showing those apps like Calm that kind of do
Yeah.
something similar.
There are several apps that make those specific noises too. I think that's a great idea. If it is specific sounds that wake you up, then working to avoid those sounds is really a great idea. So that can be either be noise machines. It can also be wearing earplugs that you can find in most stores. Similarly, if you tend to wake up because of light, just wearing one of those sleeping masks can really help. So a lot of these issues tend to really impact sleep, and the solutions are pretty common sense for the most part, but they can still be really effective.
Yeah. Yeah, so glad to see everyone is really engaged and has lots of questions. If anyone has any more questions, please post them. I know that we're getting a few good comments, things that have kind of helped them, or certain situations. Someone mentioned that pistachios have melatonin. Not sure if you guys know about that, but I know that they do offer. You can get like melatonin over the counter as well.
I didn't know that. I didn't know about pistachios.
Does anyone have any other questions? Please post them in chat. Trying to take a look. Yeah, Lise, this was such like a great comprehensive talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Yeah, some people are also recommending some relaxing music.
Yeah, wonderful. So the bells can be really helpful. Nature sounds work for some people. Yeah. Well, again, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So
And,
if we don't have any other questions, then I think we could. Oh, I see one coming in. Oh wait, no, we answered that one. So yeah, thank you guys all for coming. I think we can end a little bit early, but I'm also going to keep this webinar open. Lisa, if you could just hold on the line, that way if we have any last minute questions. But other than that, we could end a little early, and I'd invite everyone to come back next week. And hold on one second, I might be able to tell you the tentative topic for next week. I believe next week is going to be a workout with Tony, but let me just double check. Yep. So next week we're going to be doing a physical workout with Tony. He's one of our great service providers, and hope to see everyone there. And yeah, so if no one has any questions, feel free to drop off. But I'll keep this webinar open for a few more minutes. Thanks, everyone.
thank you, everyone.